today we are joined by ThoughtBat.
Hello.
Hello, ThoughtBat has a YouTube channel of his own. I really should have put the description, the link below, but I will do that after the stream is over with. But yeah, he's got a YouTube channel, same as his namesake, where he makes, what, anarchist-related content?
Yeah, pretty much. I've not made, anarchist-related content. I made a few video essays on egoism. I did a response to Hakeem, which has been my most successful video. But I think the most important video I've made is my analysis on property. It's not the most successful, but I think it's probably the most important to my kind of political applications.
Right. All right. Well, now that you're here, now that you're in the room, metaphorically, well, hit me up, man. Anything you want to talk about. Politics, economics, history, philosophy, theory. The world is your wheelhouse. Hit me up.
Wow. So a lot of freedom there. So I was going to, I was thinking of giving you the opportunity to ask me a few questions about anarchism, and then after that, I'll raise a few points about your political position as I've become more familiar to it over, since our last debate on President Sunday's channel. So, any questions? Go for it.
All right. So, I guess we'll start with some easy ones. How did you arrive at anarchism?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So, go way back when I was about 16 years old. I started off as like a liberal, typical liberal Democrat party in the UK. And I kind of just, the idea of freedom just kind of rang with me. I didn't really justify it or come to any kind of deep logical conclusion about why freedom is good. I just thought it was good, and I ran with that. I then ended up going down quite a classical liberal laissez-faire capitalism phase, which lasted about 6 months. And in that phase, I was debating with other syndicalists and communists and such. And they effectively convinced me that capitalism was antithetical to the promotion of individual liberty, even the promotion of economic liberty. If we see, people describe the current state of things as a free market, but the state is, the market that we live in today is fundamentally riddled with state-secured privileges for corporate beneficiaries and things like that. So that whole oligarchical, plutocratic, microeconomic setup we have is completely antithetical to anything like a free market.
Yeah. Like, I remember, because I've known about anarcho-capitalism for roughly a decade. I first learned about it when I watched a debate between Stefan Molyneux and Peter Joseph some time ago. And I remember watching it, and it was just packed full of ideology. Just, Molyneux is a very good rhetorician. He's a very good speaker. But I just remember that a lot of his answers to a lot of Peter's questions and arguments were primarily like ideologically driven. Like when he would ask things like, he's saying that the state is just a tool to accommodate the needs of the market and the capitalist class and so on. And he's basically driving that point home. And it's funny because Molyneux even admits to it, that the state exists to facilitate capitalist ends. And he says, but that's just if there's a state. If there's no state, everything's fine and dandy. So it's funny because these people kind of like narrow everything down, like blaming the government for a lot of issues that are otherwise largely intrinsic to the system itself. So ANCAP ideology, I've noticed that there's kind of like a pipeline to fascism there, because I've met a lot of ANCAPs that either go like monarchist or they'll just become like neo-Nazis, I mean,
yes, I've seen that, especially in the UK, because in the UK, the Libertarian movement had very close connections with UKIP. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the UKIP party is basically Nigel Farage's old party, which he eventually left. And Sargon of Akkad is a UKIP candidate, he was a UKIP candidate for European Parliament. It seems to me, I was never an ANCAP. I flirted with the idea, but I was always convinced that I understood that there was a clash of interest between the working class and the owning class. And I was reading some of the things communists were saying, and I was thinking the state is needed to keep it falling into some kind of mob rule. I thought a constitutional state was needed to stop it from doing that. But then when I really thought about that, I'm justifying the state, I'm justifying monopoly and force, and thus justifying taxation. The whole thing just became one great big contradiction. I think the libertarians' general movement as it is today. I mean, when we say libertarian, we tend to think about the Libertarian Party in the US. I think that the way they are the way now, that doesn't make sense. The way they are now is because of McCarthyism. So back before McCarthyism, the Libertarian movement was quite a radical anti-capitalist movement. You had people like Benjamin Tucker and other mutualists who are more similar to what Kevin Carson is now, or what Proudhon was back in the day. They very much emphasised with a lot of Marxist talking points. They took a lot of things from Marx, and they built their ideology around the labour theory of value because they read that in The Wealth of Nations. The groundworks for the labour theory of value was found in The Wealth of Nations. And then Marx obviously built on that, and Rudolf Rocker built on it as well. Proudhon added some stuff. But after McCarthyism, it seems to me that both mainstream socialist and libertarian movements have become a lot more sanitized to accommodate for capitalism. Whereas libertarians ended up saying, well, capitalism is the embodiment of a free market economy. It's not. And and mainstream socialists today, like Jeremy Corbyn and co., will say capitalism is a necessary part of creating the wealth to redistribute and raise people's quality of living.
Yeah, someone brought up the non-aggression principle, and that's why I brought up this, because you either do nothing and kill 5 people, or you pull the lever and kill 1 person but violate the NAP. So it's like one of those things that shows like how simplistic the non-aggression principle is in its framework. But in regards to what you said, with respect to the history of the libertarian movement, I don't know exactly who came along and changed it, but I know that not just Orwell's an anarchist, but in general, libertarianism as an ideology, I'm aware that it's basically another word for anarchist back in the day, but it got co-opted or appropriated by right-wingers, or really just like neocons or paleoconservatives rather. So they basically co-opted the term, and basically that's how we ended up with modern-day libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism. And it's kind of a faux populism, honestly, because when you get down to it, what these people want is so homogenous with what neoliberalism ultimately wants. That is the privatization of the roads, the infrastructure, literally everything being transformed into a private service, because the basic rationale is that anything the public sector can do, the private sector can do better. So these people, they see the problems with the system, and they might rightly point out some contradictions, but on the other hand, they blame socialism for it, and then they want to take the rationale of neoliberalism to its logical conclusion, which is sort of like a kind of feudalism, really, when you get down to it. I mean, that's where I think we're going to be in the next few decades, is sort of feudalism, you know?
Potentially. It depends on what the left does in reaction to things like the climate crisis and whatnot. To be honest, I don't consider the right-wing libertarian movement to be any kind of threat, because, as you said before, they don't appeal to any kind of material interest, anyone's material interest. There's a reason why mega corporations don't support libertarian candidates. They support Republican or Conservative or Tory candidates, and they don't appeal to workers because their whole platform is, reverting back on workers' rights, which the working class has fought for hundreds of years. So they appeal to no one, really, apart from, as you said, an attempt at ideological purity.
Yeah, or like a low to mid-income, sort of like the middle class, small business owner. That's typically the people that are of that consciousness. I mean, I've spoken to people who are lumpen. I think that lumpen workers tend to be of a sort of a libertarian consciousness as well. And I think a lot of that stems from the kind of dog-eat-dog individualism that comes with Lumpenproletarian consciousness. So, speaking of which, let's talk a bit about the lumpen. What do you know of the Lumpenproletariat?
Absolutely nothing. I'll be honest, absolutely nothing. First time I've heard of it.
All right, so the idea is the lumpen are basically the underclass strata of capitalist society. They're basically people who are of the working class, but they're basically detached from like the legal measures by which they subsist. So they might, instead of just working a job and so on, they might live on unemployments. They might be someone on welfare, drug dealer, prostitute, someone who either is just, just a reserve, because we're at a point to where there's not really a lot of productive labor left to do, and you have all these people who are disabled or people that can't find jobs. So capitalism, just to keep these people from, dying, is basically just has reserves of these people that just live on welfare, right? Just that's what I consider it, just reserve pools of labor, just reserves of people that are just kept alive. Because otherwise, if they didn't have these in place, then, well, I mean, radical consciousness would spread overnight. So they're keeping these people on the teat, right? Dependent on the teat, so that they don't rebel against the system, more or less. Or at least that's why I think the welfare system exists. But that's the general idea. Basically, they're workers that either live on welfare, drug dealers, prostitutes. This is like the group, the main contingent group I'm talking about. People who take it one day at a time, living off the skin of their teeth, trying to survive. They're the underclass of society, if that makes any sense. People that are left behind by the system. That's generally like who the lumpen are considered. As for the role that they play, I'm sure are you familiar with what Marx had to say about the lumpen?
No, I'm not actually. Hit me up.
Yeah, all Marx really said was that they weren't worth anything and that they were just counter-revolutionary. A lot of modern Maoists, like first world Maoists, will say that the lumpen are a revolutionary demographic in themselves, but the problem is like a lot of the toxic consciousness that comes from the Lumpenproletariat, mainly the individualism, the dog psychology that a lot of them have. I'm not saying lumpen can't be comrades, but my official position is that we should sympathize with them and uplift them so that they get proletarianized. So once we bring them into the ranks of the proletariat, then they'll be cadre material. So if you've got someone who's like a drug addict, you help them get off drugs. If you have someone who lives on the streets, you help get a roof over their head. Mutual aid, my friend. Mutual aid.
Yeah, I agree, because obviously it's not the best state of living, is it? I mean, I wouldn't relegate all sex workers to the lumpen in that regard, but obviously, as you say, there's going to be nuances about it. But yeah, they are effectively a product of a dysfunctional system, and that system is something that both you and I wish to change. And so, those people who are interested, who have material interests in seeing their situation improved, are effectively going to be our class allies, really.
Yeah, of course. Now, this is an interesting one. What do you think of prostitution? Should it be illegal? Should it be outlawed? Should people be allowed to exchange sex or sexual favors for monetary or material gain?
I'm not opposed to it. I'm not in favor of criminalization, because to me that it's the same as a drug argument. It relegates people who are going to be interested, who are forced to becoming a sex worker into crime syndicates and people who have no interest in honest trade and things like that. It pushes them towards what I call the red market. The red market is different from the black market in so much as it effectively involves violence and extortion and exploitation, as opposed to the black market, which is like you're selling goods which have been stolen off the back of a van or shoplifted or whatever. So I think those two things are different things. I'm digressing. I'm in favor of the legalization of that. What are your views?
My stance on it is that I don't like prostitution. It is the most raw and naked form of human exploitation that there is. And there is good reason why socialists, communists throughout the millennia, more like throughout the last couple centuries, have been vehemently against it, and why in many historically existing socialist projects they've outlawed it for good reason. I don't think it should be outlawed, however, but it's mainly for the reasons you bring up, that I don't think prohibition is a very effective way of tackling a social problem. I think a better way to handle it would be provide people with the economic opportunity so that they don't feel compelled to do it in the first place, but it should be decriminalized. It shouldn't be encouraged, but decriminalized. That way, if someone's like being sex trafficked, or if someone's, in that situation, they'll be able to go to the police, and they'll be able to go to the government and let them know, I'm a victim of sex trafficking. I need out, like, help me out. And they won't have to worry about being punished, basically.
Yeah.
That's kind of my stance.
Because sex workers aren't a monolith of people who have the same material conditions surrounding them. Because some of the people I know who are in that business, who I met on my course, my teacher training course, not my teacher training, but the course that came before that. Sorry, and they had a student loan. They were living in student accommodation. They had pretty much the same life as I did, but they saw OnlyFans as a way of making another £40-50 a week, just to buy some more beers at the weekend. So, I don't think we'd say that's a terrible result for that person. I'd probably say it's a better result, really. There could be a psychological analysis done into the maybe the mental health impacts of prostitution. Maybe there's some things to be found out about it. They probably already exist. I haven't read them.
Yeah. Under a socialist system, I think that prostitution should constitute a social ill that public officials should be doing programs to actively eliminate, not through through direct coercion so much as just like economic and political policy to tackle the problem, like community awareness programs, shelters for victims of abuse. And I think the abolition of money and the establishment of like as I've called it, a labor voucher based system or a labor credit system, you could, at the very least, you could basically make prostitution impossible. I mean, I suppose people could still trade sex for like favors and so on, but such a relationship is much less exploitative than if they were just exchanging for cold hard cash,
Yeah, I think. What was I going to say? I've got 2 points. In Britain, we had a problem with the criminalisation of brothels, and they define a brothel as a building with more than one sex worker in it. But the problem with that is sex workers typically have another person with them for safety reasons. So if you ban brothels, then with that definition rather, then you've effectively criminalized having another person who's in on it, not in the room with you, but nearby, close by, in the same building for your own protection. So there's problems with that. And the other point was, what philosophical difference is there between selling your body for sex and selling your body for productive purposes?
Selling your body for sex and reproductive purposes,
and for the difference between that and selling your body for productive purposes. So, for example, just working in a factory, you're renting your hands to manipulate resources. Manipulate materials into commodities. What's the major difference?
I would say the major difference, or why I think the case of prostitution is even worse, is, there's selling your time and your labor, and then there's selling your body. It's just it's such a more direct way. Like you're literally selling your own flesh and blood for money. And I feel like maybe morally or ethically it isn't really worse, but I think on some visceral level, I suppose I just take more pause with it. I wouldn't, because I feel like there's layers of this. I wouldn't exactly equate work in the corner with working at a Starbucks, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, so and I understand that. So it's about the intimacy and how close your body is to the other person. So how about a massage parlor?
Yeah,
a spa.
Massage parlor. I mean, I suppose it's not as bad as long as you tell them to hold the blowjob.
I mean, what I'm referring to is it is a body-to-body contact, and you're still delivering a service to that person. They're feeling good as a result of it. I think it effectively derives from our value for that romantic intimacy of sexual interactions. I think that's where it comes from.
Well, the thing is that sexual, it's so much more close and like personal than if you're giving someone a massage or you're working behind a cash register. I mean, you are either literally inside someone else or they're inside of you when you're having sexual intercourse. And, you know, there's a lot more implications that go with that than if someone's laboring for you. I mean, you've got STTs, you've got pregnancy, but, you know, of course, contraception. But I think maybe there's something else that's very like hardwired in like humans to see sex much differently from the way we would see other activities. And it's largely because, you know, women are incapacitated for like 6 to 9 months after they get pregnant, you know? So this is an interesting point. Massage has healing properties that have nothing to do with sex.
I wasn't saying massaging has direct linkages to like sexual interactions. What I would say, when we talk about STIs and stuff, there are some jobs which involve the risk of contracting diseases, like working in the mines. You can get different kinds of poisoning. Working in nuclear power plants have come with risks of radioactive poisoning, etc. Which are also workplace injuries can put you out of work for months on end. Death, even workplace death, is more common than death in the military at the moment. So it's because really, are we being materialists when we talk about the personal intimacy, the romantic connections, and this, that, and the other, or are we being quite ideological about it?
Yeah, I don't know. The sex debate in leftist circles has been going on for a very long time. I'm not too well read on the subject. A lot of Marxist feminists I'm aware of historically are rather sex negative. I lean a little more towards the sex positive side. It's really just because there's just a very massive unequal exchange and with respect to like prostitution, because people don't sell their bodies for sport. They don't do it for fun, typically anyways. You know, I'm sure there's some people that enjoy having sex as a career, but I'm just saying the majority of people that go into it are not going into it for fun. They're going into it because they've got nowhere else to go for the most part. And like you mentioned, there's like college kids who will perform sexual acts on camera so they can pay their bills because whatever the hell jobs they have aren't paying enough. So, I mean, people are going to do what they got to do to get by. But I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on the subject, but I do want to move on.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm no expert on this at all. I've had the conversations about it before, but those are just my immediate thoughts.
Yeah. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and bust out a little bit tougher questions then. So I guess give me a general rundown of what your model, like anarchist society, let's say, I don't know, Great Britain has an anarchist revolution, right? Has its
Anarcho-Brittannia.
Anarcho-Brittannia, yes.
Yep.
You've got the red and the black British flag. Hold on, what's the British flag looks like now?
The Union Jack in it is the crosses on top of each other.
Right.
The Welsh flag is excluded from it because they don't like the Welsh. I'm also Welsh and I'm very sad about it.
So here's
I'm
what
not
we do.
I'm not a nationalist. I'm going to take on the stream.
Wait, someone came on the stream? I was just going to do this. So while you're explaining, I'm going to be having some fun, but I'm listening. Go ahead and explain give me a general rundown of what your model, Anarcho-Britain, looks like.
Okay, cool. So before I start, I need to emphasize that because I'm effectively advocating a free society where people operate through voluntary interactions and they decide things for themselves, I can't give a exact manifesto for how things can be implemented. I think that's generally quite a problem with anarchists and how they
All right.
how they
Well,
explain the views.
I got an even better question in them. You have your revolution, assuming there's no civil war, there's no times of siege, like the rest of the capitalist world doesn't fuck with you. Let's assume some other countries have revolutions too. So, I know it depends on the conditions, but I guess what I'd like to ask is, what would a transition to an anarchist society based on mutual aid and exchange and benefit and free association look like?
What would it look like? It would look like something like Christania at the moment, where they effectively have worker cooperatives within their territory. They have workplace democracy. They have locally elected councils, possibly a polycentric legal order. We can go into that a bit later. But the thing is, when we talk about like the country transitioning from where we are now into a more anarchist society, we actually have a very different means of doing it from that which Marx talked about. So in the Communist Manifesto, Marx explicitly stated, and Marx and Engels specifically stated, that the siege of the state is going to be the first step of the proletariat revolution. Now, I was reading Exodus by Kevin Carson, and he stressed that if we look at the transition from feudalism to the bourgeois society, the seizure of the state was one of the last things they did. So the French Revolution, the bourgeoisie were already developing their system within the shell of the old system before the seizing of the state. So capitalism was already pretty much in full swing prior to the late 1700s. So what I'm suggesting is a kind of counterpower, gradualism, if you like. So effectively this means supporting movements to expand the cooperative sector, supporting unionization efforts, supporting mutual aid networks, also deterritorializing various kinds of associations. So I'm losing my words, but in terms of like getting things done, in terms of mutual aid networks, we can do them through the internet and just distribute finances. We can help redistribute wealth via oh god, what are they called? By virtual societies, I should say. That's it.
Gotcha.
And
so
those kinds of things are happening now.
So this is such a broad one, but so I guess some immediate short-term goals would. So before the revolution, you build your unions up, your mass organizations, your cooperatives, and so on, and then you have it. And so, what are you left with after the revolution? So you're talking about directly smashing the state, right? Or
Yeah.
is there some sort of transition not state of some kind? So what the goal would be is you would just have like some sort of not state, but like the goal would be to flatten hierarchy and influence over time, right? Or
Yeah, the goal is to reshape the economy in line with usufruct property norms.
all right.
So as long as you use an object, then you are justified in owning it. And I can give you the justification for usufruct property rights if you want me to go into that. But effectively, my justification doesn't scale up to the system that we have now, where owners of capital have nothing to do with the capital which they own, and they're just effectively used and managed by employees. So the transition away from absentee ownership to usufruct ownership is, that is the path I'm talking about.
All right. So from absentee ownership to user ownership. So this effectively what you're talking about is means of production, fertile land, soil, homes, just whatever's located around the people at present basically becomes their collective property, right?
Yeah, effectively, yeah. And there's multiple ways society can function around this. It's dependent on how the people who own their usufruct property decide to associate with the community. They could redistribute their resources and put them into like a local stockpile like an anarcho-communist society. That's been done, and that is being done in some places. Or you can be more of a mutualist. I call myself a mutualist, and trade it through a cooperative economy, similar to the one that I was talking about with you in our debate.
Gotcha. So I guess we'll introduce some material conditions in your project. All right. Britain has its it has its revolution. I don't know. Let's say it happens. We'll give you some more territory. Want to have you Western Europe? We'll give you Western Europe. That sound good?
Okay.
All right.
That sounds perfect, actually.
Yeah.
Because that is the goal of European syndicalists, to capture Western. Well, there's a strip in Western Europe on the Rhineland and such. But yeah, go.
You have everyone except Portugal, because I say so. And so now you got to deal with the United States, in the sense that America has a bunch of military bases across Western Europe. And I'm assuming there would be like a war, of course, like America. I don't think that we would get any like Napoleonic, like, beach invasions. But I mean, under such conditions, America would definitely try to encircle. The capitalist world would definitely try to encircle such a project. I don't necessarily think like Africa, but I could see China doing it, and I could see America and like maybe a few other countries that all have investment in Europe, or they have military bases. I mean, you guys take control of the bases, you got weapons and armaments. So if you're in such cases, like, I'm assuming you would start doing a lot of self-management and self-production at home with respect to resource distribution and like production and so on, because if you're being sanctioned, you're going to be limited on what you can have.
Yeah, the fact that you've given me Western Europe is quite an advantage, because syndicalists have identified Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, Alsace-Lorraine, and the Rhinelands as being enough enough of an industrial center to be able to produce all we need without becoming reliant on the United States. So US imperialism will become less effective if we have control over those areas.
So you would have an easier time holding out, you think? I'm sure
in case of an economic warfare, I think holding those areas would be advantageous.
All right. So here's where a couple tougher ones are going to come in. So without like a central authority acting with any sort of broad oversight, assuming everything's just decentral and everything's organized into your federations, right? Federation, the right word for it?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, all right, sure. So, what are some pressures, like, or what are some ways you would prevent, like, I'd say certain federations or certain communes and so on, that basically they start charging rent. They might start charging rents for an essential resource that is just unique to their area, and they found that they could enrich themselves if they just speculate and charge extra for, I don't know, all the potassium. They've got a potassium mine, and you guys really need potassium. So, but they're charging that extra top dollar for potassium. What would you do about that?
What would I do about that?
Yeah, like I guess the other communes, would the communes just encircle the commune that's like starting shit or causing trouble with the rest of the group?
Well, I mean, I think if if that commune which owns the potassium is just holding it, they're refusing to sell it effectively.
Well, no, they're selling it. Like, the idea is that they're selling it, but they're selling it way above market prices with like the deliberate attempts to take advantage of their neighbors. Like, what would you do about something like that?
Is it controlled by the individual workplaces workforces that operate that?
Well,
produce potassium?
it would be the collective owners of the mine. They all came to the collective decision and they talked it out with their buddies and neighbors. Like,
Okay.
Why don't we just charge extra for the potassium? Everyone's forced to pay. So and they decide to do something like that. I mean, is there like are you going to get like a collective arbitrators? Is there going to be like a court, or I mean, are you just going to let them make everyone go broke over potassium?
Well, if they're going broke, they won't be able to afford the potassium. So I don't see how the market would even function with potassium in that instance. If they're outpricing their consumers, then they wouldn't be able to sell it. So I'm a bit confused how the monopoly comes, how this situation would even arise if we're operating within a mutualistic economy.
Well,
it's very much dependent. It's very much dependent on one workplace having access to the entire potassium, the entire source of potassium in the continent.
Well, the potassium is just an example. You could swap it out for coal, lithium, wheat, something like. The point is that you have a scarce resource native to a given region. It might not be the only source, but it is a scarce resource, and they're one of the sources. So the whole point of the question is that within the context of a market economy, if you've got something that everyone needs and there's no other show in town, then you're going to be incentivized to raise the prices to make more money off of it, basically. And this is going to come at the expense of your neighbors. So I was just wondering, like, how exactly you would, under such a circumstance, deal with something like that. I'm trying not to make this a loaded question. Like,
yeah, I understand. Yeah, so it's fair enough. So if you said if it's going to come at the expense of your neighbours, so I'm assuming it's an essential resource. So effectively, they won't be able to live.
A price inelastic good. That's what I'm talking about. Like, how would you deal with price inelastic goods? Because here in America, all of our price inelastic goods are managed by private services, and as a result, the market equilibrium price is above and beyond what most people would be able to afford baseline. So that's the reason why healthcare is so expensive. And despite the fact that it's so expensive, it's more profitable to charge more, even if it leaves like tens of millions of people out to dry, is my point. So I don't know, like, if you don't have like any sort of government or oversight to like introduce regulations or price controls, or you don't have a way to negotiate or, dare I say, threaten them to stop charging too much for this inelastic good. I mean, would the neighboring communes just like, I don't know, steal the patent to it or try to distribute their own version of it? Would like local markets try to like, I don't know, make substitutes? Like, what exactly would be done in the wake of that?
So I think I understand the question now. So in terms of how resources are, how land and etc. is redistributed, and the whole justification for usufruct property is effectively an appeal to mutuality. So as long as it is mutually beneficial to uphold certain rights, then those rights will be upheld. Like, for example, the right to life. I am coming back to this. So in the context of a monopoly or a natural monopoly, I do actually advocate for either consumer ownership or common ownership. So, for example, the water supply, which I think is a more obvious example of a natural monopoly. If a cooperative if a private cooperative owned that water supply, then yeah, they'd be able to charge whatever the hell they wanted. Across a specific region, the consumers have no choice but to pay them that money. So in that case, I would say it is then justified to expropriate the workers' ownership of that monopolized resource and distribute that ownership to the consumer.
So expropriation. So it's the majority imposing its will on the minority. We're like, yo, we ain't paying this top dollar for this motherfucking potassium, dog. So, you're going to start charging us less, or we're just going to take it from you.
Yeah, because you're talking about a labor aristocracy, aren't you?
Yeah.
So
No,
in such an instance, if you have a labour aristocracy, then you don't really have an anarchy, do you?
yeah, you know, you provided me with a much better answer than some of the answers I've heard from ANCAPs on such a subject. So we'll leave it at that. But I got a couple other good ones. I mean, this is a question I posed during the debate, but I was asking you how you would maintain full employment, or if that would even be a goal. I interjected that the reason why I want full employment is because people need stuff to do, and at least until we get productive enough to where we can distribute according to need, then people are going to need to do some degree of work, and there's going to need to be some sort of incentive to send people to do labor and civilization, basically, and remuneration according to work. But within a cooperative market economy, as I pointed to with the Yugoslav example, and I mean, I'm sure you've had plenty of time to think of an answer to this, but it's been shown that, at least with the example of Yugoslav, that they were not able to guarantee full employment, and unemployment was a growing problem. So within the context of your ideal cooperative market economy, how would you circumvent such a thing?
So I don't set full employment as a goal. Okay. But to answer the Yugoslavia question, in Yugoslavia, they didn't actually have worker ownership. They still had state ownership. The companies were still propped up propped up by the state. A group of workers couldn't take a loan from the bank and set up their own cooperative. It had to be at the expense of the state. But you did have something called you did have worker self-management, and that part of that management was employment. So it is true that in those areas there was no incentive for them to expand their workplaces because that would effectively lead to a reduction of their share in the pie. But there was no opportunity for any other company or any other cooperative to see a gap in the market and set itself up. So that's a problem when using Yugoslavia as a comparison to like an anarchist mutualist economy sort of thing, because it wasn't worker ownership. It was worker management, yeah, true, but it wasn't. Production wasn't really owned by the workers. I'm repeating myself.
Okay.
So I was watching. You probably hate this guy, Richard Wolff.
I don't hate Wolff. I like Wolff.
No? I thought MLs didn't like him.
No. The ML critique of Wolff is that we don't like his fetishization of co-ops. Like, he overemphasizes the importance and role of co-ops in the broader movements, and because of that, it kind of paints a distorted image of what we believe the ultimate goal should be. Otherwise, I like Wolff. I think he's a great introduction to leftism in general. Just personally, I think he has his limits. That's all.
That's interesting, because anarchists have the exact same criticism. He effectively upholds the cooperative society as his penultimate goal, or his ultimate goal. And it's not even my goal. I talk about markets because I think markets will fill in roles which will help a perhaps planned economy. Fill in some areas where it might be dysfunctional, but we can come back to that because I want to address the actual question. Yeah. So Richard Wolff points out the difference between cooperatives and Yugoslavian social enterprises, and that was literally that. So in a capitalist company, you have managers and you have directors. The managers are hired by the directors, so it's like a director-managed economy sort of thing. Whereas in Yugoslavia, what you had was social enterprise, where the state owned the thing, but the workers hired the managers because they were the best leaders, perhaps in the role. They more quickly addressed some problems which weren't being addressed by the central government, etc., etc. But it wasn't that kind of thing. So one of the ways the reluctance to hire more workers could be dealt with would be the possibility for workers to set up new cooperatives to fill in gaps in the market. Now, the reason I'm not entirely on board with the full employment idea, one, I think you need to have a job market, and to have a job market, you need to have people who are. Well, you need to have jobs which are available, and you need to have labour which is free flowing. So you need to have a pool of people who are between jobs, between work. So the existence of that is contradictory to full employment. So, for example, I'm having problems right now trying to find my first job as a teacher because of COVID. Teachers aren't leaving their posts; they're not doing anything. It's only the retirees who are leaving gaps open in the labour pool, so in the job market. So there's not many jobs available. But also, I think companies themselves need to be able to have a labour market, so from which they can analyse candidates and say, I think this person is going to fit in with us, or this person is going to fit in with us, just for freedom of association purposes. But obviously, I'm not going to ignore there's problems with unemployment, obviously. So I think those things can be alleviated through general mutual aid. Because, if, for example, I mentioned in the debate, a local area where there's where there is poverty, because that's a problem, isn't it? Employment causes poverty, which is the problem. Those cooperatives are going to want to invest in mutual aid services, which generally raise the quality of living of their community, which reduces crime, it reduces, it boosts happiness in general. People like having happy neighbours. And we see this with cooperatives today. Cooperatives are far more likely to, invest in community services.
Oh, is that it?
Did I not answer the question?
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. Like I said, I'm not looking to press you too hard just because you said you wanted to ask me some questions, so I wanted to go ahead and...
Yeah, you can press me as hard as you can. I mean, because obviously I want to make sure that you and your audience can get the best.
Yeah, no, I understand, and it was a pretty similar answer to what you gave during the debate with respect. So basically that... I mean, what, would there be like a mutual bank that would give new cooperatives an opportunity to start up, basically? Is that how you would start new cooperatives? Because you said that the answer would be to allow people to start co-ops at will, and that through welfare and like the social safety net, like unemployment, it won't be too much of a concern. So people that can't find work will be taken care of through the social safety net by the economy, effectively. All right. So, but about I was asking about the co-op startup thing. So, would there be like a mutual bank? How would that work? Or would people?
So mutual banking. So mutual banks, mutual credit unions. Sorry, credit unions already exist today, and they're effectively owned by their members. So they give out loans and they charge a minimum interest fee. A minimal interest fee, which covers admin stuff, and it goes and the rest of it goes towards a reserve, so they can loan out more loans effectively to new members. The difference between this and a regular bank is that the interest isn't being siphoned off just to the back pocket of either. My friend talked to me about banks which are owned by their employees, which I'm actually opposed to, because I think that's going to be the employees just siphoning off interest rates, not for reuse by the reserve, but just for their own by their own monetary gain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. I'm sorry, I was starting to space out a bit. I apologize. But no, I got a general idea of what you're talking about, just mutual banking and so on.
Yeah, so that's how that works.
Yeah, all right.
And they exist today, and they're quite popular in America, I believe.
Would economic planning ever be introduced into your system?
Yeah, I'm no opponent of economic planning, just so long as it's done by a voluntary association. So, for example, I don't call myself an opponent of ANCOMs because I think ANCOMs are my political allies. It's just that ANCOMs themselves acknowledge that voluntary association is necessary for their thing to be valid. So if a group of people come together and say, hey, let's have a stockpile and let's freely distribute it, That's fine. I've got no problem with that. But I think there's limitations to that model, and so those limitations will be filled in by market forces. I think that can only work for communities which are like about 100 people strong. In Christiania, which is a place I've been to, it's technically on paper an anarcho-communist society, but it's not. If you go there, they still have markets, they still have currency, they still have effectively, they're still making things and selling them to buy luxury goods. They have housing guaranteed to them, but because obviously land's decommodified. But markets still function.
So here's a statement. This is an interesting one. As a disabled person, I think anything less than full employment is theft upon the least of the people. I mean, I don't know exactly what he means by that, but okay.
I don't know what it means either.
Yeah, no.
All due respect, could you ask him or them to clarify?
Yeah. Could you clarify this statement, buddy? Appreciate that. So, all right. Let me think if I've got anything else. I apologize. I didn't really write down any questions in advance, and I mean, you made a video addressing some of what I had to say.
Have you watched it?
Yeah. So, yeah, Thought Bat made a video because addressing a series of questions that I've posed at the start of our last debate. If you guys like to check it out, and I did watch it. I'd have to go through it again because I was going to do like a rebuttal or response. I probably will make like a written video about it at some point, but I got to get through making videos about people that I don't like before I start making, like, I guess, friendly responses to people. Yours would be a friendly response, sort of like the friendly response I made to Jason one time. But most people I make videos about are people I generally do not like, or people that I just have criticisms of.
I've noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. My most recent video, man. Actually, I'll get into that after we're done talking about this.
Yeah. After we've gone through this, I'll crack some beers open and we'll just have a friendly chat about it.
No, I was wondering if you had questions for me.
Yeah, I've got some. So obviously, I know what Marxist Leninism is. I've read quite a bit of Lenin. I've read State and Revolution. I've read Imperialism, Highest Form of Capitalism, and I've read Infantile Disorder. And I've not read as much Marx as I should have done, or should have done by now. But effectively, so I've got some stuff written down. So what have I said? I've said vanguardism relies on ideological purity throughout the party, and so the whole concept of a vanguard party is you need to have a group of people who are going to put out a rigorous platform for which the country is going to follow.
Yeah.
So this is going to require a certain degree of ideological purity. And this means that worker access to political power must be restricted. Otherwise, we'll see some heavy or severe party splits. It seems to me that these vanguardist movements end up disagreeing on how the society should be taken forward. And so we've seen in Britain especially, these communist groups having an argument over what should be done and then just splitting. I don't know if this is a problem in America.
Are you asking like how to prevent splits? Because
no, not quite. Because I know how splits are prevented when these parties come to power. So when these parties are in power, they typically go through purges. They keep people out of their movement to enforce this ideological purity. So my question is, how does this reconcile with the general idea of a dictatorship of the proletariat as a general rule?
Well, how does this reconcile the dictatorship of the proletariat? The absolute, you mean the absolute rule of the working class, or so I guess I would say, I'm trying to narrow it down. Are you trying to suggest that party bureaucracy or leadership might have interests separate from the workers? I
do, but that's not what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
I do believe that, but that's not my point.
Yeah, because I don't necessarily think ideological purity is the word that I would use to describe. I would say more like scientific commitment to the construction of socialism. So, how familiar are you with democratic centralism?
I got a general gist of it.
All right, so let's go ahead. I'll go through it for you real quick. I can tell you in about a sentence. Democratic centralism is the idea that you have your party, and over issues you have open debate over them, and it's a period where everyone and anyone can voice their mind or speak their mind and so on, present their cases, and there's like rigorous debate over this issue for a period of time. But eventually what happens is that once the party has reached a consensus on an issue, or the majority have reached a consensus on a position, then from that point on, debate is over with, and the party will now have created a platform around what the majority have decided, and that platform will be executed, and then that's it. So basically, the point is everyone has their voice, everyone has their say, and once the majority has come to a position on something, then that's it. The debate's over. The rule is going to be enforced.
Okay.
But the whole point is that I mean, it's both democratic, but it's also dictatorial at the same time, is the general idea. Because in the Marxist world outlook, dictatorship and democracy are not mutually exclusive.
So who attends these debates?
I mean, everyone in the party. Like, if it's decisions being made within the central committee, then everyone within the central committee. If it's within like a given regional council on a given issue, then it's everyone within that council.
Okay.
I think that you know, never mind. What were you going to say? So
if it's party members who are the ones debating and voting on these issues, I assume party executives of some form, or it could even be decided by the party members themselves, people can be ejected from the party, surely.
Yeah, people can be rejected by the party.
Okay, so yeah, because we don't want fascists being in the Communist Party. So it's not.
Well, hold on. I know where you're going with this, and I know what you're talking about. Historically, the Soviets had single-party elections and single-party candidates where you could either vote or reject a person for a given position, and they were also recallable from below, so they could be recalled and held to account by the people that they were appointed by. And I do want to say that I am in favor of multi-party or multi-individual or multi-candidate elections, or at least that's what they were trying to do, but policy never got passed. But you were saying?
So yeah, well, I think multi-party elections contradict the idea of vanguardism?
No, not multi-party, but multi-candidate elections, and no, not necessarily. Believe it or not, Stalin actually tried to reform the Communist Party to make it so, to where there were multiple candidates for a position at a time, and that you can choose from a pool of candidates instead of having one person that's either voted or rejected by the group. And some people actually voiced against it. They said something along the lines of, if we have these multi-candidate elections, then what if, right-wingers or reactionaries manage to become one of the multiple people? And Stalin said that, if we're losing elections, if we're failing elections against right-wingers and reactionaries, then in a sense we deserve to fail. Stalin was never able to get the multi-candidate reform passed. There were a lot of democratic reforms that he fought for while he was alive, but some of them he was able to get past, most things he was not. So if your criticism is that there's not enough democracy and it's too bureaucratized, then believe it or not, Uncle Joe himself would agree with you.
Yeah, fair enough. So, but I'm still trying to think, because the party has the power to eject people based on ideological differences. and they also have the power to nominate candidates, even in a multi-candidate system. The candidates themselves are selected by the party, are they?
Well, the candidates are not chosen by the party directly. They're chosen by their local and regional Soviets. So you have the council, and the group basically decides who they want for this position. They draft a vote, and they can either vote to pass or reject this person, or recall them at a later time. And then that person is appointed to this position. It is true that the Communist Party in the USSR did have the power to reject candidates at times, but this is in general how their political process worked. Being ML does not necessarily mean that you want to recreate the political organization of the USSR verbatim. It had a lot of problems, and it was, in my opinion, too top down. So I am in favor of a one-party system. But I'm in favor of a different kind of democracy from the way it was organized in the USSR.
Yeah. So I suppose my question is more about, so say we have something in the US or in the UK. Mm-hmm. We have the Communist Party of the USA, maybe not who they are right now, but the representatives of it, right, controlling the thing, and they have a ideological falling out on the same level as Stalin and Trotsky. I'm not talking about assassination, but I'm just talking about an ideological falling out to the point where big leaders in the party were ejected for ideological differences. Would candidates be able to? Well, what would stop that party from excluding candidates who are running on similar platforms to the recently ejected leader?
Are you talking about? I'm trying to understand your question. So, like, you mean like someone like a Trotsky coming along, and then there's a falling out? What would stop more people coming along? Well, I'll tell you what the Soviets did. They just basically banned people from that ideological bloc, more or less. They just had a bunch of them removed.
So that's my problem. So, but would you be in favor of the Communist Party banning candidates from
banning candidates? Well,
banning Trotsky's candidates, for example.
Banning Trotsky
or Pogonist candidates.
Pogonist candidates. Pogonist. Well, if it's a Pogonist, then yeah, I'm honestly cool with that. But in general, I don't. What they did wasn't exactly out of line with the principles of democratic centralism, though. So I think fundamentally, what we need to get to the root of is our critiques of democratic centralism, because I mean, Trotsky lost out in the political arena pretty damn hard. I mean, like, sweeping majority was in the favor of Stalin and his camp. So that's how Trotsky and his group ended up getting rejected. And in all honesty, like, I mean, ideally you wouldn't have like political falling outs like this. We'd hopefully be able to create a situation where we're able to reach compromises on things. But if you have people that are just like opportunists, or people that, you know, have they're only in it for themselves, or like are potentially corrupt, basically, then you need some way to remove corrupt or reactionary or counter-revolutionary elements within the party. And that's, you know, the reason why they had such tight discipline. But like I said, under my model, ideally I wouldn't leave it to the party itself to decide who needs to get purged. I have a different vision, something that you might actually appreciate. So you would have like a group of auditors, right? You would have like an entity or organization separate from the government, and their job is basically just to root out foul play and corruption. And these people that are part of this auditor group, you know, they're chosen from the citizenry at random. So they're chosen to their position directly from the citizenry. And so their job would just be to root out corruption. And rather than leave it directly to the party leadership themselves, I think there should be like an auditing group that like checks for foul play, you know?
Okay.
Think of that.
I think you mentioned I think you mentioned that kind of model in the debate, and I have I've got some questions about that one as well.
Yeah.
So, one of I understand that it's not necessarily meant to be a fully democratic entity. So, my not democratic criticism is we can ignore that. I'll go into the next one. So, what if the randomly selected candidates are reactionaries themselves?
Oh, well. That is an excellent question. Remember when I mentioned those auditors?
Yeah, those auditors who are selected.
If the auditors are reactionary, that is an excellent question. I mean, everybody in like administrative positions, I think the main goal should be to make it so that the levers of power, or the people who wield the levers of power, is to remove the whole imposition of having power over other people and instead turn it into something to where it's just another job, like driving a truck or building something, or I don't know, managing a cash register. The point is we need to remove the incentive to be corrupt in the first place. And that's the reason why I'm such a big proponent of sortition democracy. So yeah, it is possible that reactionaries do take power. But on top of being less likely, the other point is if the system's actually democratic enough, then we could potentially end up in a position like, you in the potassium kulaks, where you said neighboring communes could just depose or expropriate. You could end up in a similar position like this. If the majority are socialist and someone's gets put to this position yo, let's restore capitalism, that's going to cause a lot of pause with all of their neighbors, don't you think? So
it would do.
Yeah, and of course this behavior should be encouraged as well, or that people are open about their ideas and beliefs. No censorship, because it's much easier to spot opportunists and reactionaries when they're open about their opportunism and their reaction,
Yeah. So would you say that they can be recalled following a vote of no confidence?
Yeah, I mean, recallability should definitely be a thing.
For the auditors?
But for the auditors themselves, and really just the political apparatus. So I don't think sortition should be applied to literally everything, but I do think recallability is an important thing. I think for local and local elections where people are choosing their sheriffs and their deputies, I think that, people should have the right to vote on their bosses, vote on their managers, as well as the police and so on.
Yeah.
But for,
I suppose my next question would be, if auditors can be recalled from a vote of no confidence.
Yeah.
So what were the point in sortition in the first place if the majority can just recall them if you don't like them?
Well, the point is that they can be recalled. It would have to be something akin to impeachments. You would have to be able to. There would have to be, I'm assuming, some sort of legal process, if this person is guilty or something, or watched. But it wouldn't even be the auditors that are exercising power. It would be the people within the party and the various ministries of labor and energy and so on. So the auditors themselves don't have any power. Their job is just to check to make sure that people in governmental positions aren't abusing their power. Does that make sense?
Well, they would have power, wouldn't they? Because if they are the arbitrators of whether or not government legislators are abusing their power, and they have the power to relieve them of their from office, then they do have power, don't they?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't really
almost absolute power by virtue of a sortition.
I mean, but I'm just trying to figure out what the incentive for it would be. I mean,
it could be ideological. Not necessarily materialistic, but ideological. They could just be there could just be Vorsh. Vorsh could be there, and
oh yeah.
I'm saying it for comedic purposes, obviously, but it could purely be ideological. I just feel like some of these potential problems could be bypassed through a far more anarchistic model. Chris Daney doesn't have these problems. Neither did the CNT. Neither did Ukraine. Neither does Puerto Real and Gadif. neither do. So I'm effectively saying I'm making an appeal to efficiency effectively. Yeah. So what have I said here? I've said central planning creates a clash of interest between planners and the on-field workers. The workers have their own incomes and lives to consider, while the planners are more focused on maximizing worker outputs to suit goals which are often disconnected from the workers themselves. Hence, clashes between public sector unions and the state. So this is my next point. Unlike strikes from private sector unions, which seek to dent capitalist profit, public sector unions attempt to delegitimize the state or the popularity of the state. If the vanguard party fails to satisfy trade unions, which is possible, it must choose between risking opposition parties, including reactionary ones, becoming more popular and wresting power away from them, or tighten its grip on industrial action and restrict the political strength of workers even more than before. So now, obviously, my system of like direct worker ownership kind of removes the need for unions, other than, I guess, in cases where it's consumer-owned. If a consumer-owned co-op would need a union, I'd say. Yeah. But if the majority of production is run through worker cooperatives,
I want to throw something else in as well. This is actually a good point, and I was meaning to bring this up, but yeah, basically not just anyone would be appointed to their positions in like my model. You would have to be qualified. Just a heads up, like, so it would be from pool of qualified candidates. It wouldn't just be from like, well, the people who get qualified are from the general public. They would apply to get trained for it, but the point is like you train as many people as possible, and then like from this pool of like just trained people, that one of them at random gets chosen, they serve a term, and then it's the next person's turn is the general idea. The point is that if the people who are elected to these positions of power and authority are working class people, they're directly from the same class of people, there's going to be a general propensity for them to have their material interests in line with the rest of the working class is the idea. As for like people that are striking, I mean, if a communist party or a communist country is doing such a piss poor job at addressing the needs of its people to the point to where you have like most of the government striking against it, then that's on a failure of the government, to be honest.
It doesn't need to be a failure of the government because, as I said before, union interests can often differ from the interests of the wider community. So, for example, the example I often bring up is not necessarily to Marxist-Leninists, but to Labour supporters. So, before the Thatcher years, Labour was having some difficulties in satisfying the demands of unions. The unions were effectively striking because of pay. Labour was saying, well, we can't afford this. We need to allocate resources to X, Y, and Z. We can't invest in this. I mean, unions were saying, well, no, we're living on poverty wages. Give us more salaries, etc. So we could possibly say the state is objectively correct in a situation.
Yeah, the state could be correct, but then like the workers in a group, in such instances, I mean, unfortunately, like you could compromise to the extent that you could compromise, but if there's just a group of people that you can't make happy, then I mean, if you're not able to address what they want, then you're basically going to have to tell them to wait until we have this problem solved. But otherwise, if they start to protest and start to strike, I mean, they have the freedom to do that, but I don't know.
But the problem I raised to Labour supporters, I know you're not a Labour supporter, but I'll say you need to sacrifice maybe one or the other. So you have to sacrifice the efficiency of your economy, or if say teachers are constantly striking, which is one of the problems during the winter of discontent, the electorate get pissed off with the government. And they'll end up. This is why Thatcher became so popular, because she put in a load of anti-union laws, which effectively restricted union action. Had all of its negative consequences that came with that. But the electorate were just happy with seeing the schools back open, or the trains working again, or the miners back to work, and all the rest of it. So there's these classes of interests in general. Like whichever side's right, the union could be right, the state could be right. I think this clash of interests is solved through direct worker ownership of their workplaces.
All right. But then you run into the problems with that as well. Like if you have no like guiding, if you don't have a helmsman like guiding the ship, if you don't like have any sort of like centralized government of some kind or organization of some kind, then you could equally run into the exact same issue as well, you know, like within a highly decentralized context. But like, for example, like with the whole market economy, where we talk about how cooperatives would basically be incentivized to pocket the earnings and the value that they create, and they would have less incentive to reinvest or basically hire other people. Or, you know, some might find that operating their commune or community within capitalist relations might be better off, you know? So what I'm trying to say is, like, you could have the exact thing happening in your system. And I mean, unless everyone, all their neighboring communes and people just hop in to stop it, like, then you're gonna have the same problem. And if they do hop in to stop it, then how is that much different from a central government doing the same thing, you know?
So two things. So again, with the idea that cooperatives have incentives to pocket investment and not expand. If you're not investing in a company, then you're not going to be as competitive. As the same with refusing to hire workers. Cooperatives which are happy to take minor losses or let's say short-term losses and hire more workers are effectively more productive and have a better competitive edge in the market. If you're saying, oh, we don't want to decrease our share in the pie at all and not hire any more workers, then the cooperative, which is a bit more long-sighted, will eventually take over and replace that dysfunctional cooperative. It's the same reason why cooperatives themselves do expand and don't pay themselves £100,000 a minute.
Yeah.
So
of course.
Yeah, so they are more long-sighted in that regard. And back to the idea of expropriation. So, believe it or not, I actually, in terms of the kulaks, who were letting their food production rot because they were trying to up the prices. If you're letting your food rot, then you are effectively not using that property. So use of property rights no longer apply to you. That property is now up for grabs. And so this is why in natural monopolies and perhaps just general monopolies anyway, consumer ownership is justified because ownership doesn't really apply. Sorry, use and occupancy doesn't apply anymore, does it? Because if you're letting a load of crops rot, then you're not using them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would be in favor on anarchist grounds for expropriating the kulaks.
All right. Well, I don't really see how that response is that much different from mine, because, I mean, under my context, though, there would still be a market in a sense, but where you don't leave it up to the market to dictate economic production and the flow of your economy. I mean, under such an instance, there would be less incentive to hoard and basically speculate in such a manner, would there not?
You cut out a bit there. Can you repeat that?
I said that under the context of any sort of market economy in general, I mean, there's just for the sake of enrichment, there is going to be some degree of incentive to speculate, to not hire as many people as they possibly could, to engage in shitty activity X, Y, and Z to basically to increase personal enrichment. And I know that you can point out this and that, like, oh, we could expropriate, but don't you think the fact that there's an incentive to engage in these shitty behaviors is kind of endemic in the first place?
It was endemic to the human species, I suppose.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, I mean, I think humans are a mixed bag, let's say.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm just saying that within the context of a socialist planned economy, I mean, you could do away with the incentive for that. I'm trying to say that you could do away with the incentive for that kind of private enrichment or the incentive for that sort of foul play, and you could render the need for competition obsolete. It shouldn't. I don't believe it should be about competition so much as cooperation, and in the process, you could eliminate economic turbulence. You could eliminate class struggle. You could eliminate a lot of the waste and efficiency that's associated with the market economy as well. And that's the reason why I think we should have a prioritized, concentrated effort towards a planned economy.
Well, historic examples kind of point in the directions of a lot of people within these governments acting in favour of private enrichment. For example, China, a lot of members of the Communist Party themselves are billionaires, and we would say that they are using the state apparatus for their own private enrichment, wouldn't we?
Yes. China went backwards. They had a capitalist restoration, a semi-capitalist restoration in the 1980s. This is true.
So
pretty much all of Warsaw and all the socialist countries that existed a century ago are gone. But my point is that they, using their methods and doing the things that they did right, they made it further than any socialist project ever has. I mean, I would say that the main contributing factors to why they aren't still around, or one of the main contributing factors, is part of what you said. Their political systems were too top down, but on the other hand, I would also say because they didn't take it far enough. They didn't go beyond money. They didn't go beyond basic commodity production in the ways that they needed to circumvent restoration. So I would say,
and that's the problem. So, for example, if they did take it further, they would inevitably be accelerating the withering away of the state, wouldn't they? But the state is their job. They have no incentive to allow that to wither away.
I would say it largely depends on who you're talking about, because there were definitely people within management that felt like their positions were threatened by certain progressive economic policies. I think the conservative wing is mostly what you're talking about, but yeah, this is the reason why I say that rather than just not have a state, we should have a state that is as accountable as possible. Like, one way or another, we're going to have a state, which is why we need to make it the most accountable, democratic, the best state that we can possibly make it. And that's what I'm trying to figure out here. And within the Soviet project, I see a lot that we can learn from, because as I've said, they've made it further than any other socialist project has up to that point, you know?
I think every statist wants to make the best possible state, don't they? And we've heard it many times in the past, haven't we?
Yeah.
This is why.
But the thing is that within the context of the USSR, for like the first time in history, we've actually had a government that protects and cares about the interests of its own working class.
Yeah, I don't. Anarchists at the time didn't question the sincerity of the worker state in Russia. Malatesta, I think I've given you the quote by Malatesta on how Lenin and Trotsky and etc. will not ever betray their revolution. However, their revolution will, or their state apparatus will eventually betray them, as it did for Trotsky. Just by the way vanguardism, I think, works.
I mean, I'm sure you could find, I'm not saying that you can't find some intrinsic flaws or contradictions within Lenin's thought, but my solution is to figure out what their shortcomings were. That way we can improve upon them and go beyond what they achieved. Because in my mind, this is an evolutionary process. You don't, in my eyes, I don't really think it's a good idea to, okay, this project failed, but they achieved a fuck ton in their time. My idea is we can take that and improve upon it and build upon it, rather than just throw it out the window because, you know, they offended my moral sensibilities here, or they didn't achieve, or because they didn't achieve everything that I wanted to there. You know, the evolution of communism, in the same manner as capitalism or other economic systems, it's a long, arduous process. You know, it's an evolution.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, but it's the same. It's the same with gradualism and anarchism. It's going to be a long process, sadly, and there are going to be failures. There are going to be. I'm not going to deny there's problems with anarchism or problems with previous anarchist societies, but again, it's going to be something for anarchists to examine ourselves and try and perfect, just along the lines of free association and economic decentralization. The final, I don't know if we want to move on a little bit, but the final point about our disagreements was going to be the ethics. You mentioned moral sensibilities.
So I want to say that it's not that I don't think ethics matter. All right. I do think ethics matter, and we do need a moral framework for whatever kind of society that we are trying to build. The argument that I originally posed during our debate was that I don't think our main arguments should be primarily ethics driven, just because I feel like people are more convinced by pragmatism and utilitarianism is all.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you. But I'm saying it's not a question of, we weren't debating strategy. We were debating exactly what policies we're going to be advocating. And so as people who are already convinced in a post-capitalist society, we would need to include the ethics discussion when we're basing our politics, also when we are talking about our political applications, because politics is applied ethics at the end of the day.
Right.
So it is important, isn't it? So I'm an egoist. So my position is I don't think any one individual is obligated to serve another person or any other kind of ideal. I think you're muted. Okay. And so from that premise, I think anarchism follows quite naturally. So, for example, if we talk about the appeal to mutuality, that would justify things like useful property, that would justify worker cooperatives, that would justify free and voluntary associations. People joining associations and producing for their own benefit first, versus being obliged to participate in some wider, greater cause. That is the ethical framework which I'm coming from. Now, it's not necessarily I condemn the evilness of altruism or anything like that. It is simply a descriptive claim about the meaning of life, even. So I take it from Camus that he said the meaning of life is whatever you're doing which prevents you from committing suicide. And what he effectively meant by that is you are the arbitrator of your very existence. So you're going to carry on existing so long as you deem life valuable. And to deem life valuable, you need to pursue your own value judgments.
Is that it?
For now, I was wondering if you got any questions so far.
Oh, questions about egoism.
Or objections, or whichever.
Questions about egoism. I guess I'll just reiterate my stance in that, you know, we're moving towards many becoming one, and we have been for a very long time. So, you know, a bunch of little stupid things come together and make a very intelligent thing. You know, the human body, and that people form civilizations, bunch of intelligent beings come together to create yet another super organism. And when you look at like the trends within capitalist society, it really does sow the seeds for communism over time with, you know, as a progressive force. But my stance is that, you know, we should care about individual freedom and liberty, but, you know, the Marxist view is that freedom of the individual can only truly be achieved if the entire group has been freed. So freedom of the group can they both come together, like freedom of the individual, freedom of the group. In order for the individual to truly be free, the group needs to truly be free. And
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So,
Because
and this lays the groundwork for a bunch of other questions. How do we go about doing that? We see the dialectic between exploiter, exploited, workers and owners, and the group isn't free if you have a minority that's able to impose its will at the expense of the majority. So the goal should be to basically overturn that system and create one where everyone's free, everyone has power. I mean, of course, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of others. But that's like the whole point of the society, of course. We're all plugged into a system, and you can have problems with that system. You can even want to change that system, but I mean, one way or another, we're all part of the system, and the goal is to make a system that serves the needs of everyone and takes care of everybody.
Yeah, so anarchists and Bakuninists at the time agreed with that general idea that so long as power structures themselves exist, nobody can be free. As in, the powerful themselves aren't free; they are still obligated to do things which preserve themselves against a unwilling mass, if you know what I mean.
Right. So I don't know if you want to wrap up, because I kind of want to end it here. I actually want to go grab something to eat real quick, but
yeah, I'll be getting some beers in a minute.
Yeah. Do you have any final memes before we go on, like, say, a 5 to 10 minute intermission?
Yeah. So my last words on this is a quote from Mike Stirner: "The labourers have the most enormous power in their hands. And if they once became thoroughly conscious of it and used it, nothing would withstand them. They only have to stop labour, regard the product of labour as theirs, and enjoy it. This is the sense of the labour disturbances which show themselves here and there. The state rests on the slaver of labour, and if labour becomes free, the state is lost." And that is from The Unique and Its Own, 1845.
Yeah. I think I'll just voice what my ultimate issue with anarchism is, I guess, because you talk a great deal about authoritarianism, or like the whole role of the state and so on. And my position is that my issue with anarchism is the same issue that I have with a lot of far left undercurrents. And when I say far left, I mean people that are like to my left, so ultras. At the heart of like ultra leftism, you'll find is individualism. It's the idea that what's best for me and my group is ultimately what's best for everyone, and that as long as me and my group are allowed to move and do as we will unimpeded, then the best outcomes can be realized. So I would say the ultimate issue I have with anarchism is it just seems like, so you have a state, that acts on behalf of workers, but if you take pause with like that state's actions and the actions that it takes to, forward the construction of socialism. I mean, unless your position is that state is just totally disingenuous in its actions, then the idea that like a small group can just oppose the will of the entire society that they're connected to, I'm afraid to say, is a very individualistic mindset, my friend. And I think that's part of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm not too discomfortable with the accusation of being individualistic, because I would say I don't really make the appeal to a majority. I don't think what the majority wants is always right. Emma Goldman exclaimed that the majority is often a dead weight on progress, and we know this. The Russian Revolution was forwarded by a minority. It was like 70% of the population who were in favor of the Bolsheviks. The French Revolution was fought for a minority, whilst a majority just sort of moaned about it. So I will still say quite happily that, okay, I am the minority, but I'm still going to act in my self-interest because I'm not a utilitarian. I don't subject myself to the majority will.